We both do that very well. Hey, welcome back to another episode of the podcast. I'm Vic, along with Skunk Manhattan. And today on the podcast, we have Mr. Nathan Ruyle. Hey, Nathan, thanks for joining.
Hey, guys. Thanks for having me.
Awesome.
Now, Nathan, your title, you would say you are a sound designer?
Yeah. I'd say I'm a sound designer. I'm an entrepreneur. I'm a studio builder. I'm a studio owner. But yeah, I'd say the overarching thing is I'm a sound designer.
That's kind of where you started in that. Now, I was kind of looking over this and just reading over like the definitions in the way that I guess in fairly recent history, of course, film, is fairly recent history, and even audio recordings for that matter, like, not just barely over a century old, for the most part. So, it used to be called this and that, and then it kind of found its this encompassing title, but you do a lot of things. You're remixing, you're doing a lot of post. Is primarily what you do, like post-production stuff?
Yeah. We do kind of like start to finish post-production for sound for movies. So it would be ADR recording, all the different kinds of audio editing, dialogue editing, sound effects editing. We do Foley here. So we have an in-house Foley artist. And then we do mixing. So, we have 3 mix stages here. Big theatrical stage. We're actually in the process of doing a big upgrade on to Dolby Atmos theatrical, which is like 28 surround speakers, full range surround speakers.
God.
Yeah, it's crazy. So that's kind of the main thing I do. But my background before this is like I started out in theater and kind of studied production and studied audio production in college. And then I worked in theater. I was in St. Louis for many years. I grew up kind of out in rural Illinois. I actually was a farm kid. And then got into theater, and then through theater went to school, studied theater and production, and then did theater for many years, lived in St. Louis, and then and also did music stuff, did the kind of like garage band thing. And then kind of like very specifically I was like, I think sound for movies seems cool. And so I specifically came out to LA, went and got a graduate degree at CalArts, which is the school that Walt Disney started. It's where the Pixar guys came from, is probably well known, but also a lot of really hip music stuff going on there. So that's how I kind of got into it. So it was like kind of a hybrid of in being interested in recording music and playing music and interested in sound in that way, and the kind of technology of it. I started out like a lot of kids, like in a 4-track, and was interested in that kind of, and just kind of got into theater, and it was like, oh, this is cool. I can kind of use some of these skills in theater, and then did that for many years, and then, transitioned into film, which is kind of in a way, most technical and also kind of most creative, I think.
Mm-hmm. Well, when you say theater, like in what capacity? Acting in theater, or?
So I studied theater as an undergrad, but I actually did sound for theater. So was professionally.
I'd love to hear about that. Yeah, because you don't think about it as much as you think about in a motion picture. Like, describe what you're actually doing in the live context of a play, I suppose, right?
Yeah. Well, it's funny how things have changed so much. Like, when I was doing this, now this has probably been 15 years ago, and that was when, and I'm 43. So, the big thing in college was like, oh, we could burn CDs. So when I was first doing theater, this would have been in like, early 2000s.
Right.
You would go and, you'd basically, if there was some sound effects or sound design you would do for a theater show, maybe some ambient sound. I worked for a company that's somewhat well known in St. Louis called the St. Louis Black Rep, which is an African American repertory theater company, and I was like an in-house sound person for them. And so, they would do like the Hamlet. And so, you would have ambient sound, and in the forest, you'd try to create a kind of vibe and try to create a feeling, much of what I do now in movies all the time. And then there would be an element of kind of, either there would be a composer, or sometimes you just have to pull together songs from, things you could find. In some cases, we would just, have to kind of build a soundtrack out of needle drop stuff. And then we'd have to burn it all onto a CD, and then you'd have to try to, play right at the right time.
Okay.
So that was kind of what it was like early on. And then, when I was in grad school, CalArts is interesting because the sound design program there, it's in the theater school. So you can kind of do film and theater and music. You can kind of choose whatever you want to do. It's super small. And then there I kind of learned now it's really sophisticated, and there's there's software called QLab, and you can build out these elaborate timelines with all these cues that follow each other. And, so then you're going into this kind of world where it's almost like, if a film is completely time-based where you're on a timeline, in this kind of working with sound and theater, it's like you're building little mini timelines that are basically getting triggered at certain points, but all kinds of elements can be interrelated. There can be video involved in it now, which was a big thing when I was there. But you can even set up like really elaborate cues that have sensors or can be triggered by specific, buttons that actors can control. There's all kinds of cool stuff that you can do with that. So, I got a little bit of exposure to that. And actually at CalArts, there were a lot of people that are on that track. They go into the theme park world, which is like a kind of really interesting version of that, like programming sound effects for roller coasters at Disneyland, things like that.
Yeah.
And then there were a lot of kids there that go off and like work at Cirque Du Soleil, which if you ever seen one of those shows is like, so sophisticated, so integrating video and sound. And, if you ever see like the show Ka at Vegas, it's like there's surround speakers in the seats. So you're getting like your own personal surround mix. So, and all that stuff runs in its own, this totally crazy, like hardware software system that's more or less designed for Cirque du Soleil. And, it's all custom. And so it's interesting because that whole world actually gets super sophisticated and actually kind of crosses over into a lot of what we do in film. It's different, but it's, it's still operating in the same kind of space to some degree.
Yeah. It's so interesting, man. To kind of just talking about your trajectory when you started out and just in sound or playing music and what theater, whatever the case was. I mean, we don't have to go back that far. We go back 30 years and we're in tape land, right?
I know, right?
And the digital world was a very, very new thing. And, and whatever was cutting edge was DAT tapes and Pro Tools,
so it's interesting.
Like, tracks or something.
It's interesting. Like so when I was in high school, so that would be in the late 90s and like kind of doing the garage band thing, playing in bands. One of my best friends, who was an only child, so his parents always bought him everything. They bought him a Roland, digital Porta-Studio, which was basically it was crazy. It was like
that was yeah. Do you remember? I can't imagine how much that cost back then. I remember in the early 2000s, a guy I had was living in like a rehearsal space shared with some different guys. We all play, and he bought one of those Roland 24 track, and it was just like I had still been using a freaking Fostax tape recorder. In 2000. Yeah, I remember when I first saw ADATs, I was like, "Whoa, cool!"
Right.
But this guy, I mean, that's what he got, and I was just like, "Holy cow!" So. Yeah, I mean that thing must have cost $6,000 plus back then.
Yeah, it was like a lot. This was like I think this one was it was essentially a 4-track recorder.
Oh, okay, I know which one.
It was the original Roland digital Porta-Studio. I think it had 4 tracks. It had 8 faders, and you could do some kind of down mixing. I don't remember exactly how it worked. It's been too long, but at the time, like. It was because all I'd ever done is mess around with tapes, like with Fostex 4 tracks and all that stuff. So it was like, oh wow, this has effects. It had like an effects processor.
And then you could and then you could like basically mix it all and like burn it directly. Yeah, I don't know if that one was like that, but I still have an old Tascam like that where it's got all the hard drive space. But then you can just burn it onto a CD, right?
Yeah. Though it probably
and now things don't even have CD players anymore.
It probably had like 100 megabytes of hard drive space or something,
exactly.
But it was cool. That's where I kind of got the bug right on, because it was like, it was just, there was something magical about it, and you always hear these like old film guys always talk about tape, like Ben Bird or all the, Walter Murch, like they were all messing around with tape. That was like the cool technology at the time. It's always about like, this creative relationship to technology. So it's like, but, I had this buddy, he was a really sharp guy and, really had an engineer's mind. I wasn't really an engineer at that point. I was like more of a singer and musician and, but I got this, immediately got this feeling like, oh yeah, this is something interesting. The only other thing like that, it's like, so that was kind of the digital thing, and that everything after that was like, computers and Pro Tools and, all cobbling, like building out like these Frankenstein PCs back when we did that. And, and honestly, I've talked about this in the past with my students when I taught, like, LimeWire and torrents and all that stuff. Like that was actually, that was a big part of getting started, because there was all this like pirated shitty software around, and it always like was funky, didn't really work very well, but you could try things. I mean, the amount of software I've bought from literally every company I stole software from when I was in high school. I mean, just, I've paid for all of it. I have 5 studios there. I paid for all of it 5 times over. So it was all worth it. But, the other thing is like, it's sort of similar. And I think you guys will appreciate this, as being into music. I remember right around that time, I play a little guitar. I'm kind of gotten away from it in the last decade, but I remember the first time I moved over from like a cheap practice amp, and then I got a Fender tube amp. And the first time that I ever played a tube amp, I was like, wow, like there's something magical here. And it's technology. It's old school technology now, but it's, there's something just so inexplicable about that tube crunch, that was, and just the power of that, and just like tearing into something with that piece of technology. And there's something even in all this movie stuff that I do, I always try to find that feeling too. It's like, how can we like push it, how can we push it to the edge? How can we get it to clip a little bit? Not literally, but how do we kind of push the energy of this work in that way that has that feeling that first time I like heard what a guitar sounds like when it goes through that tube preamp. There's something else happening there that's extra magical. So
right, yeah, interesting.
So I'm bringing all that into all this,
So sound design, it's so funny, like listening to you talk about this stuff, because it really is like the magic behind the curtain, behind the scenes that you don't. All those things, I mean, that are affecting you, and you don't even think about it as much, right? It's like because you're seeing visually what's happening, you're hearing the dialogue. Yeah. Maybe you're conscious of the music, maybe you're not, depending on the context, but there's so many elements. And so now a lot of times you're obviously working, like, I didn't even know what Foley meant for the longest time. Like, Foley is a guy who creates, walks on the glass, makes different sounds, right? Creates sounds.
And it's named for this guy, Jack Foley, who worked at Warner Brothers, I think. He was like the guy that came up with this idea at Warner Brothers. It was like, if I record myself walking in sync with the people on picture, we can get a better quality sound of the footsteps than if we tried to do it on set. Yeah. But now it carries his name. But yeah, it's like, it's a huge part of the work we do. It's like, I actually like, and I think it's, we're so in computers now. But movie sound is still as a real kind of visceral part of the process. It's really important. And Foley's kind of the ultimate version of that, because you really are getting in there and you're like manipulating objects. It's, the thing we always think about is walking around, but so much of it is about, manipulating objects, and like, anything can be really expressive. If you really kind of turn into it, it's like I can set a glass down on the table so many different ways and express something through that. And, I did this movie Searching. I don't know if you've seen it. It was a pretty big movie. And it's all takes place in computers. And so you're sort of seeing the entire movie through someone's computer screen. And in that movie, we did all the keyboard and Foley sound, all the keyboard and mouse sounds. We Foleyed all that. So even when a character's like typing and you're hearing them typing and interacting, like the way you click a mouse can express all kinds of things, you know? And so ultimately, like in all the Foley work we do, it's always the best opportunity to really express something interesting, you know, or bring a unique quality or a unique texture to the work. So it's like, you know, it's a really, I would say it's an essential part of sound in movies. And I had never done it until kind of towards the end of grad school. I started to work with some people who had more experience. And up to that point, I'd always been going into like sound libraries and chopping up sounds and, you know, cause that's kind of, you know what that, I know how to use Pro Tools. I can cut things up and find things. And then I worked with a director and she said, oh, I'm going to bring in my Foley artist. He's going to do a day and do Foley work. And he was actually, I don't know his name. It's been so long ago, but he was one of the Foley artists on the show Lost. And he had done, you know, huge resume. He'd been being a Foley artist for decades. He did a sequence in this film that the film is called Disillusion. It's by this director, Nina Menkes. It has like it has very surreal moments in this movie. And it has these kind of walking sequence where this character is kind of walking through these tenements and walking through these buildings. It's like a very expressive kind of, you know, mysterious, going through all these spaces. And it's just walking. It's literally like 12 minutes of walking. This Foley artist, he's like got set up. He got like a surface here, a surface there. And then he just walked a step. He walked this entire like 13-minute sequence once, got almost all of it in perfect sync, changed when it went to wood floor, when it went to tile, when it went to a step, changed it all in real time. I didn't even have to edit it. It was done.
Wow.
That would have taken me, to cut that out of a library would have taken me a day. And he knocked it out in 15 minutes. And it was better than anything I could have chopped up, you know?
Well, that goes back to the tube analog, real, you know, a great player, an experienced player playing expressively on an instrument in real time. Of course, you could take the exact same notes and you could take them all and put them somewhere in MIDI, but it's not, then you go, you know, it's not that. And that's what makes, it's interesting that we're talking about film sound in the same way as music and the word visceral. Because it's something live happening. And I think even if it's on a subconscious level that affects you differently than something that is just sort of, like you said, a chop and paste, right?
Yeah.
What are you going to say, Vic? Were you about to say something, Vic?
No.
Oh, I thought you were.
The other thing
is cool, man.
There's some really weird, cool stuff happening with technology too, because then you can kind of hybridize it. So, like for instance, there's this really cool company called Krotos, and they make these wild pieces of software. They make a piece of software called Dehumanizer, and it's a lot. You'll hear it a lot used in like Walking Dead. It's how they make all the zombie sounds. It's basically like a voice modulator.
Oh wow! Okay.
But they also make another piece of software that's basically it is all the different parts of sounds that cars make. So you can like choose the car. So you could say like Tesla, and it has all of the like all the button sounds, all the squeaks, the tire sounds. And then it kind of works like a video game. So you can then modulate the revs. So you can go through on like a fader, and you can be just modulating the car. And so you can be doing the revs and the gears and all of those things. Though Tesla doesn't have the gears, but you know, it could be a Mustang, it could be an old muscle car, could be something really ordinary, but you can then modulate the engine. So then you can, in real time to picture, you're using this like completely sampled. It's basically this really sophisticated, really detailed sampler, but you're able to modulate it in real time to picture.
That's
so in
amazing.
That case, you could go and record those cars and you could get all this material. But then again, to cut that all up and get that into the movie would take days and days and days. But then if you put it into this kind of engine modulation system, then you can do that. They do the same thing they have another product called Weaponizer, same thing. Hundreds of weapons, all the different ways that it shoots, the way the magazine works, the way it ejects shells, all of that. And it's all built into it. But the one that's the most interesting is there's that one. And then there's they make a product called Reformer. And then there's another company called Cargo Cult, and they make a product called Envy, and they're very similar products. And they actually relate a lot to an old school, what's like kind of old school, this really weird synthesizer called a Kima. Have you ever heard of a Kima? I'll talk to you about it. It's interesting. It's known in the music world too. There's a lot of music people that are way into it, like Square Pusher and, like really crazy.
I know some keyboard guys that know all the cool.
Yeah. The key. Let me come back to the Kima because it's its own thing that's really interesting to talk about. But like Envy and Reformer. So what those things can do is that they basically you do something called cross synthesis. So here's a practical application for this. So you can basically in these programs separate the frequency and the amplitude of a sound. So you can say, for instance, like you could have someone walking along, and so the footsteps are modulating, and you see the amplitude modulating, right? Then I could take like a texture like rock or snow sound, or, basically any sound that it doesn't have to be a practical sound, but that's a practical application. So say I want to add more grit to these footsteps. So you could have had the Foley artist do a great performance of the footsteps, but then the director says, but these sound too clean. You can just go into Envy or Reformer and hit a button and add like a stone texture. And then the footsteps the Foley artist did will modulate that texture, because basically the amplitude of the first sound plays the frequencies of the second sound, and then you can blend the frequencies together. And it's like, so
it's just there's no end anymore with the digital parameters. It reminds me of everything audio. It's the same idea about amp modules and Kempers, you can manipulate everything, and then after the fact.
Even my microphone.
It's fascinating though.
My microphone is this.
Tell us about that mic.
This is a Townsend Lab. We just got this. So what we do, we don't do a lot of music work. We mostly do ADR, which is, re-recording voices for movies to sync. A lot of voiceover work we do here in the studio. For us, it's always a thing. It's like, I want to have a lot of outboard gear and a lot of cool microphones, but it's not that practical for us because I'm not running a music studio here. I don't need a big mic locker, so it just isn't a good, of all the things I need to buy, it always ends up being pretty low on the list. I mean, we have a handful of we have a 414, we have a lot of different shotgun mics, we have the basic stuff. But I recently got onto this. This is this company called Townsend Labs. This is like what it is an emulation microphone. So it's interesting. I guess you guys can kind of see it here.
Yeah, we can see it.
What they did is it's just a very high end condenser microphone. It's like $1,000. It's like your usual large diaphragm condenser microphone, but it actually has two capsules. So it has one in the front and one in the back. So it's essentially a stereo microphone. And so what it can do here is because it has this stereo field, what they can do is they can get very high detail data, sound information from the microphone, because they've basically analyzed the way this microphone responds. And so what then they can do is they can create algorithms that will take any microphone that would, all the common ones, U87, U67, C12, all the classic microphones, and it can just apply that as an emulation in real time. So it's a piece of software. It runs in Pro Tools on the HDX cards, which are the DSP cards. And so in real time, it will, with virtually no latency, I can just switch between microphones. So like right now I'm on a C12. I can go to like a 67. This is like a U67 emulation.
Is that like a package thing you buy? The microphone and the software comes with the microphone?
Yeah, exactly. So you can go to like, and we've been testing it out, like a vintage U87. I don't know. I'm not monitoring my own voice, so I don't know if you hear a difference. But, and the cool thing is that you can do it in post-production. So you can track the stereo mic, and then you can go in later and decide like, oh, I want to hear what that voice sounds like in a U67 or a U87 or a 414. And we've done a little bit of testing. We had a C12 in here a couple weeks ago. It was pretty good. And, Sound on Sound, I always read Sound on Sound, and they gave it a good review. So I was like, oh, this seems like a safe bet. You know, is it the same as having $100,000 of microphones in a cabinet and vintage all this stuff? Probably not, but it's a great choice for us because it gives us the option to, like, you know, bring a little bit of a different tone or different texture in when we're working with different voiceover actors and stuff. So yeah, but this is like, you know, it's all this really, and a lot of this is going into, it's using artificial intelligence. There's a lot of AI type stuff happening with sound. The biggest area is noise reduction, where it's like using really sophisticated artificial intelligence. So, and it's not just like I hit a button, it goes away. You really do have to understand how to use the software. But in terms of how much, you know, someone like me that's been doing this for almost 20 years, now it's like the difference from, like, if I got a noisy piece of dialogue 10 years ago to now, it's like, it's just not even in the same ballpark of what I can do today than what I could do a decade ago. It's just, you know, you can just, if you can literally really eliminate,
isolate and eliminate specific frequencies.
Or like Mike Russell, like there's D Russell plugins now. You can just take away Mike Russell. And there's like, you know, I've got a plugin here called Unfilter, and it's an expensive plugin, but it will literally, you could have like a microphone under a shirt where it's just completely muffled, and you can just tune it, and it's like it just takes the cloth off of the microphone. It's unbelievable. Yeah.
What do you use software wise? What are your programs that you tend to work in?
I mean, we're a Pro Tools shop, and Pro Tools is 100%. In the film industry, especially in LA, New York, London, it's the standard. You know, there's in Germany, I think, there's, you know, some people use the Steinberg new window, which is like, you know, Cubase's production software. I've used new window. It's a really nice piece of software, but, you know, Pro Tools is the standard here, and that's kind of our ecosystem we're in. And, you know, both hardware and software, like here you can see we've got these cool, we've got
can't quite see. Yeah, what are your converters?
Yeah, here this is back here. Here's some of the, you know, some of the, like, this is one of our smaller stages.
Yeah.
We're using a lot of the Avid Pro Tools hardware. Then in the back, in the big stage, we have the big S6 console, which is their kind of flagship console, and scrolls the waveforms and the meter bridges and all that. So, and then beyond that, I mean, we have, in every room, we probably have, I don't know, 50, 60, 70 different pieces of software we're using. Nugent Audio, we use a lot of their stuff. That's a real standard in post-production. Their limiters, software limiters are incredible. I'm a big reverb guy, and, you know, we use reverb on everything, and, you know, reverb in the, like, kind of convolution. We have a lot of convolution. Altiverb is a common convolution. That's the standard in the industry, which is bathrooms and kitchens and living rooms and then other, you know, so that's a big thing. And actually my technique in mixing is we actually program every scene in the movie with a reverb. So we always have a reverb there on a knob. We can just add a little bit of
it's just an automatic ambience that you create with every
exactly. And
environment.
If it's a bathroom, it's a bathroom. If it's a kitchen, it's a kitchen. So and then, you know, and then we have some, we use exponential audio reverbs, which are pretty common in music now too. That's Michael Carnes, he was one of the original Lexicon reverb programmers.
Oh, okay.
He went out and made his own, reverbs that are just fantastic. And he actually, it's cool. And I don't know if you guys know much about the whole reverb thing. You know, there's the sort of different camps. There's the convolution reverb camp, which is where they go in and they take a microphone and a speaker into a room, and they actually capture the acoustics of the room. And for, like, you know, there's some really cool stuff. The company that makes the number one is Altiverb. It's a company from Denmark, I think. And they actually came out with a new piece of software a few years ago, called Indoor. And it's literally a 3D model where you have like a whole house, and you can take a virtual microphone and a virtual, speaker, and you can set it in different rooms of the house. And then you can also open and close doors, so you can get the sound of, like, oh, the neighbor upstairs or someone in the bathroom and you're in the other room. And then it actually is 3D, so you can turn the image. So I can actually, in the mix, I can actually lay like, oh, I'm going to make the neighbors upstairs in the back of the house, and then I can kind of set that in 3D space. And yet it's all in that reverb. So it's like, you know, it's a convolution. They captured this in a house. They have this microphone array that spins in 360, and so they capture these sounds in 360. So it, and there's cars in there. So like interior car, there's like a boat. So yeah, it's, you know, it's really cool.
Yeah,
so,
man.
So that,
yeah.
And then reverb, we use, RX, which is isotope. That's like the big, you know, cleaning up audio, and then so many other things. There's so many. It sort of becomes a little bit ridiculous.
Yeah, right. It is. You're just like, it's daunting. Like, where do I even start?
Well, here's the crazy thing: is I have
thousands of options.
I have 6 rooms that that basically have parity. So we have to, if I decide to add a plugin that's in our regular template of work, I have to buy 6 of them. So that's
okay.
Because we need to be able to open up the project in every room and work on it. So yeah,
right.
So it's a
we
big
talked
choice.
a lot about, and so in your different rooms, you have different projects going on, kind of thing, right? Is that the idea behind that?
Yeah, I mean, when we built this space, so I got into post-production, I guess it's been now like 12, 13 years ago. I got to work in different areas. I also worked in radio a little bit, in public radio, so I got to have that experience. And then kind of decided to do my own thing and start my own studio. And I started basically built a home studio. It was a garage studio. Use that for a few years, got some movies into Sundance, started to build a client list. And then I was able to move into a, professional facility. I actually shared it with another company. Had a little mix stage, had a little ADR booth, very small footprint. So this space we're in now was a bare warehouse. And so my company grew to the point where I was like, we have to find new space. We need to, we have a lot of, we generally these days have 2 to 3 feature films going all the time, plus short films, plus other little things. So, I had about a decade of working in other facilities to kind of figure out, like, what do I like? What do I don't like? What would I like to try to have in my own facility? And some of the things are really practical, like air conditioning. It's always a problem in studios. It's like, this room's freezing, that room's too warm. It's always this battle, people battling over the thermostat. So I was like, when I build a studio, I'm going to find a way to make air conditioning have a thermostat in every room. And so we did it. We used these split systems that use it's like a ducted system, but it's actually like, every room is its own unit. But then, a lot of things we're thinking about are just like, where's the movie business going? So a big thing is streaming, obviously, and Netflix, and a lot of our movies are like, they'll live in the theater for a minute, but then they're mostly streaming. And now we did a movie, Voyeurs, last year that was for Amazon. It was forced to streaming. It never was in a theater ever. So one of the things I was thinking about is, like, how do we create a facility where we can kind of support all the different, not only different types of projects, but all the places a project will play. So to be able to say, like, okay, we can mix in the big theatrical stage, and we know it's going to sound great when it goes to South by Southwest, or when, a few of our movies do a wide release, and we know it's going to sound good in the theater, but then how is it going to sound for when it's being streamed, or how is it going to sound, on a home theater system? And so the idea was to kind of create a footprint of rooms. And if you go to our website, there's actually a 3D tour. You can go and look at the 3D model and kind of see the space and how it's set up. But, so that was the idea, is that we can kind of have within the facility all the potential experiences that somebody would have with a movie or a television show. And, from mixing on small near field speakers all the way up to a giant mix stage with, huge theatrical arrays and 28 surround speakers. And so that's that was a very conscious choice.
Is that like, are you talking in terms of like from reference points, or you're actually mixing it differently for different mediums?
It's both. And that's, it's, the room plays a big part in it. And that's the interesting thing about movies. And I mean, this stuff applies in music too. I mean, like Bobcats and the K system. I've never ever heard of that, but it's like, Bobcats is like, oh, well, whatever dynamic range you're trying to get with your music, you set your speakers at that level, and then you have that much dynamic range.
Right.
We kind of do something similar in movie mixing. So there's the basic is like the loudness, like in a movie mix, the loud to soft, because you're mixing for like a big speaker in a theater, the quiet sounds, the space between very quiet sounds and very loud sounds can be very big,
Mm-hmm.
But then when you go to play that on a television, we've all had this experience that in that instance, the music sounds too loud and the voices sound too soft.
Mm-hmm.
And so you're constantly turning it up and turning it down. Well, that's because the movie was meant to be played on big theatrical speakers, which have the range. You can hear a pin drop and hear like a jet plane scream by, and it can handle both of those. Whereas your home TV, the dynamic range from quiet to loud is much smaller. And so that's why you end up with that remote thing. So
it's like trying to listen to an orchestra on a television, man. It's
exactly,
just the worst. Yeah.
Exactly. And movies are like that. They have big orchestral dynamic range. So, the way that we think about that technically when we're mixing, but the big part of it is getting into the room that is emulating the environment it's going to be experienced in. So, for instance, like this movie, The Voyeurs, we did for Amazon, we did a theatrical mix as our base mix for the movie, which was more dynamic range to play great in the theater. And then we went back and did a near field mix of the same movie. So we go back in, we come into this other studio that has the near field speakers in it. It's still an Atmos system, which we could talk about. It's like all the ceiling speakers and all that, but they're monitor. They're like near field monitors, more normally like what you would work on music in. And so then, you're just by the nature of the device, the nature of the speaker, you're going to get less dynamic range because the speaker doesn't have that dynamic range. And, it's the same as like putting things through Aratones back in the day, right? Like the Aratone was simulating, it's like the Dropbox thing. It's like, oh, the Aratone simulates the average speaker in a car stereo. So you would like do your mix, then you listen through it through the Artone, and you could see like, oh, how does it translate? And then the classic is then you just go listen in the car, right? You burn the disc and go listen in the car. It's the same idea in movie making. You got to go in, listen to it in the speakers.
Yeah,
and in fact,
that makes sense.
We even sometimes, like, even if I'm in the big stage, we've got this really shitty, sound bar. It's like not even a good one. It's like went to Costco. I was like, what's the shittiest sound bar that I can buy at Costco?
I want shit sound.
Yeah.
Please.
I was like, what's the real $75 sound bar? And so I'll bring that in sometimes and just set that on the console up at the top of the console. And then, we've got this system Dante where everything's like networked audio. So I can have a button and I can just flip that on and listen to it.
Sure.
And, it's interesting because it's like, oh, wow, I'm mixing this movie for like giant theaters, knowing that actually most people are going to be listening on something not even as good as the sound bar,
So true, man. Yeah. Same thing. I don't think most people probably think about film. I mean, I'm a musician. I think about music, but it's like, it's that old joke about, you do all this fancy stuff in the studio and you're worried about all these different analog, this and that, and all that. And then and people are listening to it on cheap headphones and MP3 on their phone. And it's the same idea. Yeah. Where all this stuff you're mixing for this big surround sound theater, and it's on a little television or something. So you have to be conscious of that idea.
Right. Or iPhones, right? Or iPhones.
Or phones.
Or earbuds.
Or iPads.
Right?
Everything. Yeah.
I mean, it's
That's
interesting.
Wild,
we're like, there's a lot happening. Also, though, like some of this is all coming full circle because we're getting ready to do this great big movie, and it's like a full-blown Atmos movie, which is part of why we're putting, it's really creatively going to be a big part of this movie, is like everything's deeply immersive. It's like a historical epic. it's shot in a way that you're kind of always moving through spaces, and so the way we're going to mix that movie is like deeply immersive. So like the theatrical experience is going to be, I think it's going to be really cool. And that's why we're doing a lot of updates to our mix stage here. We're doing this full blown theatrical Atmos setup. And then we're going to actually go up and mix it at this huge, beautiful theater up here in LA. It's like a full size movie theater, that has like, I don't know, 80 or 90 Atmos speakers in it, so that'll be an incredible version of the movie. It's likely this movie will be wide release. It could be in the Dolby theater. So, there's like in the US, there's a few hundred theaters. You guys are in Austin. There's some great Atmos rooms there. Some of the newer Alamo rooms have nice Atmos setups in them. But, and then there's all these other versions, right? Which is like, there's Atmos sound bars, there's regular sound bars. What's interesting is we've been talking about a version of the movie specifically designed for the new Apple earbuds that do Atmos, which I don't know if you've read much about, but it's like there's a lot of music. If you listen to music on Apple Music on the app on the iPhone, they actually have music mixes in immersive audio, like using Dolby's like immersive audio technology. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting. I don't necessarily love music that's mixed that way. It's like a preference. Some people seem to really like it. I don't, it hasn't really grabbed me. I'll say that. Mm-hmm. But what you can do with this technology is you can basically take that mix that's designed for a room with 100 speakers, and you can make a version in the software that will do a stereo binaural output that then will go and play in an iPhone, that someone could watch it and get that fully immersive experience through the headphones. And it's like a setting in these Apple earbuds that's set up for that immersive audio. So you could actually get a 5.1, what would be, that surround sound experience in a pair of cheap earbuds. And so one of the things we're talking about with this movie is like, well, since this is so creatively important at how we're going to mix it, that we want to play with maybe trying to create a version that's specifically designed for that person who's like listening on a pair of earbuds on an iPhone. And can we bring some of that kind of immersive quality that we're getting in the big theater experience to that? So it'll be interesting to see if it works. Who knows? But
as this whole craft has kind of evolved, like, so when is even sound and film start? When were the earliest? I
think it's the earliest 20s? Was Edison. Yeah, like Edison started.
Well, in terms of just reproducing sound, right? But film.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering when, obviously at some point there was Foleys and people going like, oh, let's create sounds. But that wasn't even an option until a certain point. So
yeah. They would do that in radio though, right? Radio shows, they'd have that kind of Foley work.
Yeah. There's like a vaudeville, and vaudeville had that too. They would do that in vaudeville, but yeah, right. Exactly. That was a big thing, right? In the 20s and 30s, there were like, radio shows that were like radio dramas. We were talking about it before we started that we've been doing some of these like podcast dramas, but so in a way that's even coming back, that kind of like radio theater idea. But yeah, it basically, sound and movies evolved with technology. So it was like the originally what really drove it was World War II and in World War II, the newsreels, everybody wanted to know what was happening in World War II, and the newsreels started to have sound. So the theaters started putting speakers in the theaters so that they could play the sound of the newsreels. And so then that meant that the theaters actually had a speaker in them. It was just a mono speaker. And that actually is then when they started doing talkies, which was actually having sound for movies. So it was actually it's like always, war always drives all this stuff, right? So
right? Yeah,
it was that need. And then obviously, a lot of it came out of World War II, right? Like condenser microphones were right around that time. Multi-track recording came out of, that was like specifically related to the war effort. So that's why you get that explosion in the 50s and 60s of all kinds of music recording and movie sound, because they were taking all that technology they developed in World War II and then, applying it for creative purposes.
Now that we've figured out things that we can kill people with, let's do something fun with them.
Exactly.
Work.
So that's, yeah. And,
drives technology.
But it's funny, like some of the really crazy ideas were around way earlier than you think. Like, Disney invented stereo and surround sound back before World War II. Actually, Fantasia was mixed. The movie Fantasia was mixed in essentially surround sound. And it was before theaters could do it. So they had they would take the movie around in a tent with its own sound system, and they would show it. It was called Fantasound. And so it was specifically designed. And in fact, for Fantasia, they invented the pan pot for that sound system. The idea of being able to pan left and right, they invented that for Fantasia. But here's the thing, what it was literally two knobs, and it had a chain that was attached to both of them. When you turned one knob, the other knob would turn. Like it was like a chain system where when you turn one up, the other would turn down. But yeah, so that was pre-World War II. So they were already kind of driving the technology. But, it's like after that, it's like all, we know Dolby and we know Apocalypse Now. Those are like the well-known, kind of like touchstones. But actually, like, Dolby Stereo was like actually the original surround sound, and matrixed audio, which was taking a stereo signal, like, you guys probably know Dolby Pro Logic, right? Which is like that button you could hit on a stereo, and what it would do is it would look at the phasing of the information in the stereo track. So it's like, the voice is pretty much mono because it's like in phase. So put that in the center, and then the cymbals, they're really kind of phasey, so those end up kind of panned out when you hit that button. But that was just a phasing thing that it would do, and that goes back to Bell Labs, and there were actually a lot of versions of that. I have a good friend who's a film historian who specializes in sound, and he's actually been studying a lot of this stuff. So we always have interesting chats. Here's an interesting kind of crazy thing he was telling me about. I didn't know, like, way back in the kind of golden Hollywood era, all the studios had their own ways of doing sound, and most of the studios were, the sound, it wasn't like now where it's like, I'm a sound designer and I have a credit as a sound designer. It was sort of like, it was a department in the studio, and, editors were even like this. It was like, it's a department in the studio and a bunch of people work there and sound comes out, but it was like a part of the studio. It wasn't, like this.
Yeah. Credits in the old movies were like, directed by this person, stars, done. Yeah. Like one screen for 3 seconds.
It was just like, the sound was done by RKO Sound. That was about all you got.
Exactly. Yeah.
So what was interesting though, is that a lot of the sound studios, they had these proprietary relationships with theaters. And so it went into the hardware too. So you would have to have a specific sound head on the movie projector to play the sound from a certain studio. So it was like the hardware was part of the deal. So you couldn't, like, if you had a projector that had the sound head that was RCA, well, that could only play the movies from this studio and this studio because they were the ones that had the arrangement. And then there was this period in Hollywood where they started making these like hot rodded sound heads. They were called penthouses. And so they were like, you could have this like hybrid sound head that had like all 5 different ways that like the perf on the film would play sound. And so you could like, it was like modular. So you could like move the sound head into place to play from this studio or that studio. So that was like, and then the real innovation that, Dolby's all, they're the big gorilla in the room, and, they make great stuff. I think Atmos, their product to do immersive sound, is incredible. But really the genius of Ray Dolby was, he was like, let's take all these technologies and not make all this stuff, this licensing nightmare. Let's just get it all into one thing that every theater can buy one box and it's done. And that was the real genius, because like, for movies, one of the cool things about movie sound is that there's basically, I don't know even how many, 1 million theaters in the world that all more or less conform to a standard for like, here are the speakers behind the screen. Here are the speakers around the audience. Here is the box that plays it. Here are the levels for the box. And so, I know in my theater here when I'm mixing, if I set the level, technically, and most of the time, it's going to translate out to 1 million rooms in the world where people are going to watch this. That's pretty amazing. You know what I mean? Like that as a technological feat is, it's pretty mind boggling that even exists, So
back to your studio, like now you have a studio here. Are you in New York too, or do you have something going on?
I had a studio in New York.
Places?
These days I'm just working out of both. I had a studio in New York for many years. And I still continue to work there. I have some places I work out of there. Right around COVID time, we were building out this facility, and it kind of just makes sense to keep both because I was just, so I've really kind of shifted my focus to LA because when we originally built that studio, we were very focused on independent films, and we're still doing a lot of indie work here, but we're also doing a lot of, more studio level feature work and stuff. So, and a lot of there's a lot of that in New York, but LA is kind of where it's at for that.
Sure. And this studio, so this is really pretty brand new, right? How long has this facility been up? 2021?
Yeah, we started building it. We started building it 3 years ago. And I thought it would take about a year, and it took, we're still finishing little things here and there. So, but we've been operating here for about, and I guess it was actually about 4 years ago because time keeps on ticking by, right? We started about 4 years ago. So, it took us about 2.5, 3 years. We had the first rooms up and running about 2.5 years ago. And then we completed it, maybe about a year ago. So we've been kind of fully operational for about the last year, but we're, I don't know if you ever built studios, but it's a little bit of a trial and error thing. I actually have just recently, we brought a contractor back in. We're doing some fixes. When we first built it, it was COVID and there was very little traffic, and we're here right in Burbank, on kind of a main thoroughfare. And I was like, oh man, our isolation sounded great. The roofs sound great. Everything's good. And then now here in the last 6 months with lots of traffic has picked up. I'm like, yeah, I'm hearing a motorcycle. I'm hearing them, somebody comes by at a great big hot rod really going. I'm like, so we actually had to bring some people in recently. We're doing we're approaching the ceilings, but we fixed it now. So, but yeah, so it is relatively new and it's a work in progress, but yeah, it's done.
So in my understanding, I guess, I don't really know a lot about this, but so you have the film, the whole thing gets shot. I don't know, how much of the original sounds even get used. I guess not much. And then people come in, Foley, whatever the case may be, you're creating sound effects, you're creating atmospheres. Obviously there's, sometimes you do music stuff, but not as much, I get. But obviously there's music to films. Yeah. And then actors. So ADR, is that where you have actors that would physically come into your studio and then they recreate the lines as they're watching the film? Is that kind of how it works?
Correct. Okay. So, I would say in most movies, you're mostly just using the dialogue. And I would say most movie these days, because we're able to clean up dialogue a lot more, we use 80 to 90% of it, of the original dialogue. Okay. And then, in some cases, maybe there's a little bit of ambient recording that went on. We're actually doing a movie right now that was shot in Pakistan, and their recordists did a lot of extra recording. So we actually have a lot of really great ambient recording that they did. But normally speaking, we're just dealing with the dialogue, and that's all the microphones. So it's multi-channel. Most of the time it's a boom or two booms, sometimes a plant mic, and then everyone's wearing a lav mic. And then we bring that in and process it all. We use a great tool called Auto Align that synchronizes it all up for us.
Oh, that's interesting. So you're actually mixing multiple mics of their the direct signal. That's cool. A piece of software. You should check it out. It's great for music too. It's called Auto Align. Auto Align.
What it
auto
does
align,
is,
okay.
Yeah, what it does is you basically choose, like, so if you were mixing music, what you could do is, because that's always a problem, right? You're getting phasing between the microphones because the time is different when the sound gets to one microphone or the other, especially if you're playing live together. What it does is it goes through and it time aligns all of the microphones to perfect sync so that there's no time differences between the microphones. And so then you can just you can just play all the lav mics and the boom together at the same time and there's zero phasing. Yeah, it's incredible. It's incredible. Wow. And it's great.
And that's
for music.
that's just software plug in.
Yeah, that's just a little software plugin. It's cheap too. I think it's like $100, $50.
Oh man, awesome.
so we'll take that in, we'll edit all that dialogue down, we'll auto align it, we'll clean it up a little bit and listen to it. And then our dialogue editor will listen and flag anything we're like, oh, that's noisy, oh, that line didn't come through, it was off mic, all the different things that can happen on a set. And then we bring the actors in. They we go through and we actually it's a pretty cool system. We program all the ADR. So we go through, we have a piece of software. It drops the script in. We can listen to it in Pro Tools. We can put in and out points. And then when the actor comes in, we actually have it pre-programmed. We just hit a button. It shows the line they need to re-record. It says the line on the screen. It shows a streamer to show how long they have to do it. And then it gives them a cue. So it gives them 3 beeps to start the line. And then we just record takes, a bunch of takes, and then we can go back and, hopefully if a lot of actors are great at ADR and they can just synchronize right up to their original. Other times they're not so good at it, but we've got other tools to,
in your worst case, you nudge and poke and, I'm sure there's always going to be some of that you're going to have to do.
There's a common tool. A lot of these tools have music and film uses. So there's a tool we use called Revoice Pro. It's how they do all the voice doubling and like hip hop and, pop music. Yeah. So Revoice Pro has a mode where we can go point it at their original line that they did on set. And then we can say, take the timing of that line and it'll go in at a subframe level, take the new take and adjust it so that it synchronizes with the original. And it even does intonation. So it even can include intonation in there. Yeah. And then, we've got another piece of software. So let's say their inflection's a little funny. So the inflection doesn't work. You can go in and tweak the inflection. It's like a little pitch shifter for inflection. Mm-hmm. So yeah. So it's cool. And so we do, ADR is a big part of what we do. And then like you were saying, the sound effects, the way we talk about it, we do Foley, we do hard effects, which are like doors and the things you see on screen. We do ambient or BGs. We call them BGs, background sounds, which is all that ambient sound. Usually we have some layers that are stereo, mono, and 5.1. And then we also use up mixers to kind of take stereo files and kind of wrap them around the audience a little bit. And then we do, then we go into mixing. So, and the mix is usually, it can go anywhere from a couple weeks to the big movie we're getting ready to start. We're going to mix it for more than 2 months.
Yeah, I can see that, man. It's a huge process. I mean, fortunately, you have a lot of automation.
Yeah,
these days.
yeah. I mean,
that are new things in real time.
Yeah, I mean, and
so much options.
And even, I mean, that's why in the end, Pro Tools because they make their own hardware. The automation integration between this giant console, which is essentially just a giant mouse,
right?
But even within Pro Tools is the original DAW. It's the original software that did this, and the refinement of the automation is just unbelievable. Because we can go in, these advanced automation modes. We can go in, when I'm mixing, I can go and take a section, go through. We're often running 300-400 tracks. I can go through a section of a scene. I can be tweaking, EQing, put it into a preview mode, EQ all the voices, go down, make an adjustment here, make an adjustment there, EQ the ambient sound, do whatever. And then I can literally select the in and out. And then anything that I've changed, I can write it in time as automation. It's amazing, and then all kinds of other things where I can put it in a mode where I can go in, and when I can be working through and writing a bunch of automations, and I can be like, oh, I messed up one little thing. And then I can just hit a button for join. I can roll back 10 seconds, tweak that one little thing. And when it hits the point where the automation was going, it just keeps going. So it all back up again.
Like you could have a whole bunch of tracks that you're doing, and that you could isolate one just for a frame or whatever.
Yeah.
But and one thing, I guess that's the idea with like having the mixers, the faders, like physically in front of you for writing automation like that.
Yeah, exactly.
Not just drawing it in, right?
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah.
Much more practical, especially when you're dealing with that much, I would assume.
Totally. And we work in template. I mean, the thing about movies sound is that like it's very templatized, and the template, that's kind of like my intellectual property that I've been developing for a decade. So, the template that I work in with my team, like we've developed so many ways of thinking about the sound and organizing the sound. And, it's so we can have a session that has, we've had sessions that can have 500 tracks in them, but because it's all templatized in this way and organized in a way, I can still have 8 faders on the console, and in 2 button clicks, I can get to any one of those 500 tracks.
Right.
Because it's all nested in this really smart way that like, it's like it exists in my mind as a map, but it's also on that console. And, that's the exciting thing about now is like, the truth is the console I use day to day, it has 16 faders because what I need is my 8 faders that are VCAs. It's like dialogue effects, music. And then I've got a screen in front of me that shows me all of everything organized into sections. And I can hit a button and have any set of 8 faders land on my left hand. So rather than going up and down a big console, I don't have to do that. I can sit there with the mouse. I can hit a button and get anything under my left hand with one click. It's crazy, and you can move so much faster, so it's a real, like, it really is. And this is all within the last 10 years, it's a real shift. So,
huge, I'm thinking from audio terms, you're basically, it's almost like your different instruments and you're sub mixing all the mics or something.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah,
and then
exactly.
And then you're just dealing, like you said, with those 8 VCAs.
Yeah. So it's just like that. It's just nested like 10 layers down, So yeah.
And do you treat it that way too? Then I'm going to assume, like, when you do a mix and when you're mixing down these different ways, do you ever have like the way I'm assuming, like, audio would start doing for like, Guitar Hero and stuff like that? Do you ever like shoot out stems in terms of like, here's these like the different categories? Yeah. That's a big, so people could manipulate them if, on their own.
We don't really, it used to be in movies, stem mixing was like a big part of it. Like, when you were at the final mix, they would really only be mixing with a set of stems because, in the analog days, you had no choice.
You had to.
You were always mixing down. And that persisted in digital, and it's still a lot of guys just work in stems. And big movies, a lot of times even, they're still kind of working in stems. I'm kind of in this younger crowd where, like, we're really trying to kind of harness the horsepower of Pro Tools. So we usually keep everything live all the way through the mix. But then when we get to delivery, that's a big part of it. They want everything stemmed down. So we have these big packages of stems that we have to deliver. So, every movie you have to, break it down into parts.
So that's kind of a standard thing. It's like, here's your stereo mix, here's your surround sound mix, here are the stems, just the whole package.
Yeah. It's a whole package. And then we have to do international versions. So where we go through and we essentially erase all of the dialogue out of the movie. So it's like you hear all the rest of the sound, all the ambient sound, except there's just no dialogue. And then they go back in and dub that over the top.
Well, that seems like a perfect stem situation because that's like, you're just like, mute this out, so to speak, or don't send that
exactly,
one. Okay,
exactly.
Interesting.
So that's a big part of it. It's it's like the deliverables thing is it gets pretty crazy. The amount of deliverables that you're required to send. It's like it's a whole job in and of itself managing all that on these bigger movies.
Yeah. When you mentioned your team, like what is a team sort of? What's a team consist of for like this big motion picture you're working on now, about to mix?
So on most movies I have a Foley artist, an effects editor, and a dialogue editor. So that's the normal team. And then I'm kind of, sound designer, whereas like kind of the creative leader of the group. And then I mix most of the movies that we do. So I'm kind of training my guys to do more of their own mixing. And that's kind of a movement in audio post, is to like, used to be people were really rigidly in different categories.
Right.
Like, and that's not so much the case anymore. The software is democratizing that a little bit. So you can really, and what I'm really working towards is I really want generalists. I want people who kind of do everything, that everybody feels comfortable kind of in all of the parts of the process. So that's like that's maybe a little bit unique to my company, but we still do, our Foley artist, he primarily works on Foley and editing Foley. The dialogue editor I work with, he mostly edits dialogue. That's kind of his specialty. So there is still some specialization within there. But that's the norm. And then as the movie scales up, normally we're just adding more effects editors, maybe a second mixer. So the big movie I'm going to be doing right now, we're going to have 2 dialogue editors. We're going to have one, because part of the movie is an Italian. So we'll have an Italian dialogue editor and our usual dialogue editor. And they'll work a lot longer. So normally my dialogue editor works like 1 to 2 weeks. On this movie, he'll work 4 to 6 weeks. And so that's just because of the scale of it. It's also because this movie has tons of extras and where we're going to have a lot of loop recording, where we're going to record background actors performing. And, you have a big crowd scene and you'll have people yelling and people saying things and little asides, and you'll see an actor as you walk by say something. We have to like put something in the actor's mouth, even though we don't have it.
Yeah.
And so that's a big part of managing all that. And then we'll have an Italian dialogue editor who will do a pass on it for Italian. We're going to have 3 effects editors on that project. And then when we mix it, and then various other people involved, and then when we mix it, we'll probably be 2 mixers. So I'm going to co-mix it with another mixer. And in that case, he'll take the dialogue and music and I'll take all the effects. And that's pretty standard on a big studio sized movie. This movie's going to have a big orchestral score. They're actually, they're recording it with Antonioni's orchestra, like in Italy.
Oh, wow. Wow.
And then, and so since it's going to have a big, massive orchestral score with a lot of opera and a lot of stuff in it, having someone that can just deal with that and the dialogue and its relationship to that is going to take a big load off of my plate. So then I can focus on like really dealing with a lot of these immersive environments and effects and everything. So, though normally on most smaller movies, I just do all of it. So
when you say a smaller movie, like what is that contingent on? Just less going on in terms of I would think probably screen time. I mean, obviously there's a different short. By the way, what is the cutoff between like a short and a feature length? Like what determines that?
Well, I mean, I think it can be anything. I would say most smaller indie movies we do, it's a function of budget and scale of the movie and running time. But most indie movies that are smaller movies are in the like 80 to 100 minute length. They're not over. You rarely get something over 100, 110 minutes.
Still pretty long,
so that's a big factor. Yeah, it's still a little longer. And then most short films are really around 20 minutes, I would say. Okay. You get some that are 30. The thing with shorts is that they're essentially calling cards for people kind of starting to build their careers for the most part.
Right.
Obviously, students do short work. And, it's a big festival thing. Most festivals program shorts that are in like 10 to 20 minute range. So you can make one as long as you want, but you might have a lot harder time getting someone to play it, So that's normally the deal. But
it's like your hit song you're just trying to put out there and be like,
exactly. Right.
What I got.
The single, But but a bigger movie is also scale. The movie that we're doing now is like that we're gearing up to is like scenes with 100 extras in them. Scenes, big scenes in an ocean going ship, all kinds of, it's part of it's in an orphanage with all these children. Like there's a big whole music festival in it. Like there's all these different really elaborate set piece scenes that we have that are just have a lot more design. It's also, it's a period piece. So that means a lot of things we have to kind of create from scratch, because most New York sounds from off the shelf are going to be modern New York. But what's New York in 1890? You've got to kind of build that from scratch. So it just takes a lot more time and energy. So that has a lot to do with it. And, you know, a lot of movies like action movies, you know, movies with a lot of CG, you're just going to end up really spending a lot more time creating things on your own rather than pulling something from a library or just, you know, it's like your standard like comedy. You know, we just had a comedy at South by Southwest. You know, it's like very normal. It's set in today. It's, you know, normal neighborhood sounds, normal, you know, it's all just normal stuff. So
what film was that you're talking about?
It was called I Love My Dad. It won the grand jury prize.
Okay. Awesome, man. Yeah. Very cool.
It has Patton Oswalt. Patton Oswalt plays a dad who catfishes his son. He pretends to be a girl on Facebook and catfishes him.
It's amazing.
They're estranged. And then it kind of goes down a very dark, very disturbing path that involves sexting and it's wild. But it was a crowd pleaser. It won the grand jury prize and then it won the audience award. So,
that's great, man. Awesome.
Yeah. But a movie like that, and you know, it's not. There's a big difference in what exactly.
Yeah.
Like there's things, you know, it wasn't a dead simple movie. There was things with technology in that. You know, there are things we had to kind of shape scenes where they're typing all the time. So you got to try to make it interesting and make it help the audience understand who's saying what and things like that. So it wasn't 100% straightforward, but yeah, it's not anything like recreating New York in 1890.
Yeah. I think it's fascinating. And you mentioned that earlier, like just the little things like like typing on a keyboard or footsteps, because the way you're typing, you know, the way you're walking, that is actually expressing emotion and can express things. And I don't think you would even think of that unless you were doing that and putting it to the film. It's really an interesting art that's happening there, you know?
Yeah. It is the real magic of movies in that, you know, here in LA, we have the Magic Castle. I actually know a lot of magicians, like real life, really great, like world-class magicians. And, you know, once you start to understand magic, what you realize is like, it's dealing with the gaps in perception. And that's the trick, right? Is that like, once you learn to move your hands move faster than someone can see, then there's a whole lot of things you can do. And that really does feel like magic because you're hacking the person's perception. You know, sound in movies is a perceptual hack. It really is. And like they put people in MRI machines, like they see that like, if you take an image on a movie screen and play it for someone, it activates the intellectual part of their brain. But when you add the sound to it, it activates the parts of your brain that are essentially experiencing real life. So your brain is being completely tricked by sound and image put together, that the subconscious part of your brain is believing that it's experiencing a real experience. And that's why that's the magic of movies. And sound like literally is what activates that part of your brain. And then, you know, the thing about sound in movies is that it's almost all constructed. Like I said, it's like we use the dialogue and that's about it. Everything else is made after the fact in the studio. So it's a complete manipulation.
Yeah.
And yet because our perception is sort of hackable in this way, it's like, as soon as you put sound to the image, you just believe that that's the thing you're experiencing and you don't question it. It gives us this opportunity to kind of play in the subconscious. And when you're being really creative and thoughtful, you know, you're servicing the needs of the movie and what makes it just work, you know, in a utilitarian way. But by making these choices creatively, you can do really interesting things to someone's emotions or, you know, just how they experience any given moment based on the kinds of sounds you use. And then if you bring the kind of musical perception, sort of like the why do plagal cadences feel the way they feel? Why does 1-4-5 feel the way it feels? Like, we know we have these like completely animal responses to sounds that progress in certain ways. Well, all that stuff's active in sound design in a movie, like, and over a career, just like you can learn to play a guitar in a way that it evokes something emotionally. I can do the same thing, having worked for so many years with wind in a movie, or the way a car engine sounds. Like, all these things still have those musical elements operating, like, it's all there. The 1-4-5 is still there. You can activate someone emotionally in the same way that music works. And, over a career of doing this, you really start to find ways, doing movie after movie after movie, of like, oh, I see how I can make a scene feel this way or feel that way. Much in the same way when you write a song, you learn like, oh, if I use this instrumentation, or if I make the guitar tone this way, it evokes a certain sort of feeling. All that's still available in a movie with the way the footsteps are, whatever. So
that's fascinating. That, to me, it's like, a lot of times I'll use, I talk about music as a mathematical language, and you think of like, there's still, now you're talking about raw sound, right? And we're still looking at it as, well, no, there's for lack of a better word, a mathematical way these things hit us. And over time, just like 1-4-5s and writing it, like, I know that these sounds in this manner are going to evoke this, and that's really fascinating, man, to think of it in those exact same terms. Right. And that's, really interesting. I
mean, the real trick is you don't have the like system. You know what I mean? Like, in music, it's like music, it's systematized.
How do you explain like, your wind is the tonic. No, like, how do you explain it, right? There's no relationship that's like physically there with the alphabet of music.
Exactly. So that's, because ultimately music is like, because I think that's like sometimes when I'm teaching, like, suddenly someone will have this realization of like, oh wait, music is just frequencies with like a template on top of it for like organizing them, Correct. And I think sometimes people can spend their whole like young life like playing music, and it never occurs to them. It was like, oh, this is like a architecture on top of this, because we know that then we can make it react and evoke in typical ways. So, it's like, that's one of the real tricks with, I mean, my goal here is that I'm really thinking in terms of the future of what I'm trying to do. It's tricky, because if you're like a guitar teacher, you can like, you have this architecture you can like use to be able to say like, okay, this is how I would play this or play that. And so oftentimes with like, it's like you're trying to teach someone a feel. It's like a fretless bass, you're like, it's all about feel. And so oftentimes when I really gravitate towards working with younger people, because I think I like how open they are. Whereas like a lot of times once you get like further along, people are really rigid in the way they think about this work. And, I really want to inspire the people that work here with me to like be, to really embrace some of these ideas and the way of approaching this, and this kind of like, how do you, it's not like, here's how it should feel. It's like teaching them to learn to be open and to kind of be sensitive and be empathic about the material. So it's like, and a lot of times it sit down and be like, okay, here's the choice you made, and it's perfectly fine. Like that ambient sound sounds fine. Here's the choice I made. And they'll listen to that and they'll be like, oh, their eyes will bright up. They're like, oh yeah, there's something happening there. They immediately feel it. It's just like in a pop song when you immediately have that feeling. And so, in a way you just have to show the choice, and then they start to understand. In a way, they're just trying to seek out a feeling. So you got to activate that part of them that's not intellectualizing it. It's the part of them that's feeling it. And so when you're going through and choosing a wind sound for a scene, you have to kind of not just be thinking totally logically. You got to like feel it out, you know, and that is a very musical way to approach it, you know, and it's like, well, what's the one that makes you feel? What do you think the scene should feel like? Probably is first, and then, you know, open yourself up in that way so that as you're listening through all your options, what's the one that kind of activates you? You know,
to me, it's like you, like as the teacher student sort of relationship there makes me, again, kind of bringing things back to the musical world that makes sense to me. Like, that's why young artists, or any artist for that matter, you know, that's why you have a producer, right? You have someone that's got an idea and an experience and a vision and can kind of craft this thing in that bigger way than just you going, and now I play this chord on my guitar. No, let's use this guitar. Let's do this. Let's make, because you're trying to go for an overall vibe, right?
Right.
But
well, that's interesting. I've never thought of it. I've never thought of it in that way. Yeah, I would say like, and that's when I say sound designer, this is one of my things that I've been like writing about. I've written some articles about this and stuff. Is like, to me, sound designer isn't like a literal thing. It's that. It's like, it's this like, how does the sound in the movie feel from start to finish? How do you create a feeling and an approach and and sometimes it's an environment, sometimes it's a space, but how are you kind of bringing that through the whole thing? And I often equate that to like production designer in a movie. Like, they figure out what the movie looks like, and it's aesthetic, of course, exactly. And they're like, yeah, of course there's painting and choosing locations and like props, and there's all these like practical parts of that. But ultimately it's like, it's a larger conversation with the work and creatively that all these different parts come into play in serving that, you know, that overarching kind of vision. And that's interesting. I never thought about that, because that's like the producer role in music, right? Is like, they're the person that's there kind of like providing that kind of like macro view of the process and kind of guiding it. And I think that's probably a great analogy for a sound designer in the way I see it.
Yeah, it's so cool, man, because like sound designer is just not a term like Foley or something. I mean, you know, like you see these kind of credits, but if you don't work in that, or you're not a little more hip, you know, to what that means, you don't really. And so it's really cool talking to you and like really getting a sense of what that means and what you do and what that job entails and all, like anything, right? The more you dive into it, you kind of, you know, you get into the inner workings and realize it's not like one guy that's sitting around going like, and now I'm going to, you know, crunch some popcorn and there's a sound. No, there's like this huge, vast, you know, thing that goes into this, right? And to me, like, it's really interesting equating all these things kind of in a musical context and thinking like, okay, so it's like, you got your stems, almost like your instruments, but your sound effects, your dialogue, you know, and all those kind of things. And seeing how that all comes together as one facet, right? Just that's one facet. That's the thing that always fascinates me about movies and music. You're dealing with this one aural thing, right? Yeah. And film, I mean, that's one facet of this even bigger thing where you have the overall macro director guy or whatever, right? Yeah.
It's wild. I think directing a movie seems impossible, you know, like, and I've been around movies now for over a decade. It's like that's like the hardest job, like being the movie director, because of what you said. It's like, there's so many elements to it, you know. It's a really movie making is a remarkable, insane way to make anything. You know what I mean? It's like, it's kind of amazing that movies ever like that this even exists. Like, how is this even possible? You know, it's amazing.
Just a song or an album, I'm like, oh my god, this is. I mean, I think like my friends and stuff who work on short films or in film in any capacity, I'm like, it's just so next level. There's just so many working components and so many people involved in so many things that to be I wouldn't want to be the project manager on any of that.
So, you know, there's another way to look at it though too, which is like, I have a lot of respect for, you know, I was a musician and I wish I was more of a musician these days. You always like, I feel like this is so many people in post are like, oh yeah, I'm going to get into this. I can build studios and I'll be able to make more of my own music. I don't ever make any music anymore because it's like totally, it's cobbler's children have no shoes. It's like, if I'm like dealing with sound all day long, the last thing I want to do is like record music at night. But
no, I know guys that had like recording studios and stuff and engineering bands, and they're just
exactly.
Dude, I listen to NPR. I don't want to freaking listen to music at the end of the day.
Podcasts, exactly. But what I will say is, you know, one of the things about working in movies is that you are given the material in a way. You know what I mean? Like,
right.
The movie is the thing. And so in that way, while while it is so incredibly sophisticated and technical, and it's a really amazing process, a singer or a songwriter, a musician that has to go sit in a room or like stare at Pro Tools or,
right.
Or pick up a guitar and find some way to be expressive and
same with a screenwriter, right?
Yeah, exactly.
You're pulling something out of thin air, whereas you're like, okay,
exactly.
There's this thing that exists, and now it's my job to make this aspect of that thing come alive and affect
right.
And,
So that's really like, I never have that feeling of like, what am I going to do here? You know what I mean? Like always, it's like, oh, here's the thing. And, I can bring my creativity and my, everything that I have and my experience and it to it. And it's so great, but it's not like an empty page. And so, so it's like music is really useful because I think we share the same tools. We share a lot of the same kind of approaches and it feels the same when it's right. It feels the same. So it is useful, but I do have a lot of respect for, what it must be to be Radiohead and like make OK Computer like that, because that's just a blank thing, like that was nothing. And then it existed. Whereas like every movie I've ever done is like, oh no, here's the container. Now you get to fill it up sonically, so I do have a lot of respect for the musical side of it. It's definitely
4 guys standing around with their instruments looking at it and they're like, what do we do? I don't know. Let's do some drums.
There.
And then
I've been there. right. We got to get out of this goddamn basement, And
for whatever reason, I make them have a terrible English accent. But hey, where are you from, by the way? Because it's not England, I'm assuming. Where are you originally from?
I grew up in rural Illinois, so outside of St. Louis.
Okay, yeah, I saw that.
Yeah.
And you were talking about St. Louis and kind of early stuff there.
Yeah, I lived there for 5,
and you've been in LA
years.
Now, I guess bouncing back and forth, but you've been in LA for
I've been in
how long?
I almost 15 years. So this is my.
And you're in Burbank. Is that you live in Burbank as well?
I did. I actually just recently moved further out in Woodland Hills, Calabasas area. But
that's the scorcher zone.
Yeah,
right. It gets hot out there.
The whole valley is pretty hot.
The valley,
but I'm here in Burbank. This is where the studio is. So
right on.
Yeah. Burbank, media capital of the world. That's what they call Burbank. I'll tell you one little final story. It's kind of funny about that. If you come into the Burbank airport here, it says that media capital of the world. And that sounds funny. Oh, yeah, it's the best. It's the best. You just walk out on the tarmac.
Yes.
But when I first saw that, I was like, oh, that's silly. But then I was like, well, actually, Disney is here and Warner Brothers is here, and basically half the sound studios in LA are here in Burbank. And, and it's like, so it is actually probably the media capital of the world, this little tiny town here, north of LA. But to sort of prove that, when I went to build the studio here, I was going through all the zoning stuff, to like figure it out. It's quite a process, red tape. It's insane. It takes like a year. In the zoning documents of Burbank, California, it talks about Foley studios. It talks about mix stages.
Oh, wow. Yeah,
there's so many Foley studios in Burbank that they're like talking about parking and how many parking spaces. It's like, oh, a Foley studio of this square footage should have this many parking spaces. I was like, yeah, this is probably the only municipality in the whole world that has the word Foley studio in its zoning document. So, pretty amazing.
Let's do some research, Vic. Let's see if there's any Foley. We got any Foley studio zoning issues in Austin.
Yeah, well, probably these days.
Yeah, Austin's pretty hip now. There's a lot of shit going on, but earlier when we were talking, I had mentioned that what the hell I was in my brain a second ago. Oh, about that 20-year-old the original Roland. And I was like, oh, I remember that from kind of the early 2000s. The big 20. The rehearsal space I was talking about was that there's rehearsal spaces right across the street from the Burbank airport.
Oh, yeah.
And I actually used to live, like, way back, I used to live in, like, North Hollywood off of, like, Burbank and Laurel Canyon. And so it's really just a hop and a skip. I would shoot over there. I was always in that area, man, because it's not far at all to Burbank from there.
Oh, yeah, you're right there. I lived in North Hollywood for years. I was there for years. So yeah, you're right here in the stomping grounds.
But you're right. Burbank is kind of its own little thing over there, though, and it is kind of cool because you're just like, oh yeah, there's Warner Brothers now.
yeah. It's wild. It's wild. Yeah.
Look at all those Foleys. They're everywhere.
I know. There's Foley happening all over.
It's Foley everywhere.
Yeah, but I mean, basically they invented sound for movies right here. This little part of Burbank is Magnolia and Victory. I mean, they call this Audio Alley because this was where, all the way back into the early days, this is where a lot of the first studios were, right here, and then over on Seward Street and down in Hollywood. But a lot of the early studios were over here. So, yeah, it's cool.
I wonder if how much of that are even original. I don't know if any of that's original. They've been built bigger and better, I'm assuming. But the same general area vicinity has always been Burbank for a lot of that stuff. Yeah, I
mean, obviously, Walt Disney Studios has been, it's all completely rebuilt. Some of Warner still has a lot of the, there's a lot of the old buildings around over there. But, like this building we're in, this was all aerospace over here in Burbank. So a lot of these, Burbank Boulevard and Victory, and then going down south of Victory, down towards Griffith Park, there's a lot of these. This was just like basically one of these kind of aircraft hangar style warehouse spaces. And there were,
I remember there was a lot of kind of like I felt like there was just this little gap. I felt like it was Van Owen or something, right? Above Victory, but there wasn't a lot, right? It was like all of a sudden you're in North Hollywood, and then you kind of drive down that, and then it takes you to Burbank. But there was, like you said, a lot of just like hangars and spaces and stuff.
This is where a lot of aerospace was back in like World War II era. So there were a lot of like airplane parts factories all through this part of Burbank. It was
that's where they were actually inventing all this shit for war back then.
Yeah, exactly, right. Yeah, pretty wild.
Dude, crazy. What kind of beer are you drinking? I'm always curious about.
Oh, I'm drinking Peroni. Because
I love that beer.
Yeah, it's a great one. We had a little party, a kickoff party for our this movie we're doing, this big movie, and it's half shot in Italy. So we had Peroni. We got a bunch of Peroni for the party. So I've been.
Is this a movie that you're not allowed to say yet because it's a new thing?
It's called Cabrini. And it's been announced. It's around. It's been shot and it's been in the trades. So yeah, we're working on that for the next few months. So
what you were saying earlier too, man, it's so weird nowadays because it doesn't matter. It seems like there's the big action hero, the superhero Avenger stuff is huge, and that's in the theaters. And there's still these mega, blockbuster type, but it's not what it used to be where everything kind of comes out in a theater and stays and hangs for even Academy Awards, it just happened. And it's just like, oh, I've never heard of these. And I'm like, oh, it's already on this. And you can already you can already find it on streaming services. So I feel like nowadays it's, when there's less of a gap between, some big feature release and an indie film because they're all a lot of them are coming out about the same time streaming, right? Immediately accessible.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's a big question, like where this is all headed now after the pandemic, and like what is the role of movie theaters, and are people going to come back to the theaters? I mean, I hope so.
There's something cool about it, man.
I think they will. I think people are still a little skittish, but I think in the next few months, and they're already starting to get better numbers. People are coming out. So I hope so. I love the movie experience, but
I'll always go just for popcorn anyway, man. There's something about movie theater popcorn.
Even though you're like, we got here
$1 billion on it. It's so stupid.
Yeah. We got a movie popcorn machine here at the studio. So when we do screenings,
that's the best, dude. Like you're watching the movie. Like I would just be eating popcorn all the time. I could never come to the studio.
Yeah. It's great. Yeah. And that's nice. I mean, one of the nice things about owning your own like sound mixing stages is like I have a movie theater that I can just go watch movies in, so that's pretty nice.
Which makes sense.
That things are on streaming, it's like a lot better. Like I could watch Dune in there, and it was.
Dude, you have a movie theater that's a business expense. You're like, dude,
exactly.
I have to watch movies, and I have to have this popcorn machine. I'm sorry, it's a write off.
That was all written off. Absolutely.
That's an amazing job right there. I don't think it gets a sound designer. Look at that. What a great job, man. Build your own movie theater and it's a tax write-off.
Yeah, perfect.
Popcorn machine.
Yeah. So last question, I think. Well, no, I actually have a couple I'm curious about if you have any particular, I'm sure you do, just, I mean, how does that work in the industry? Are there got sound designer guys that you're like, oh, this is the dude, like you were saying, you know, one like legendary, this Foley guy, these guys that have been doing it and they're great. So I guess in the inner circles, there's like, this is the guy, and oh my gosh, that dude, and you've got those kind of guys, but the average person wouldn't probably know those names like we would know the names of directors and actors and stuff, obviously. But
there's a
what
few
are some
that are
influences for you, just either in that or a directorial department, or just some of the people that you've worked with or aspire to work with?
Yeah, I mean, there's some real, you know, there's some people that have kind of crossed over into like being semi-famous. One of the most famous is Ben Burtt, who did the Star Wars movies. Some people recognize, you know, that name. And Ben Burtt's an amazing inspiration to everybody who does sound for movies. You know, he's an incredible, creative and also very humble and very like gracious person in the industry. So
it's always good to know.
You know, there's another one that's really well known and that I really love a lot of his work is Walter Murch. And Walter Murch is sort of famous for, he worked with Coppola. He did Apocalypse Now. He did the Godfather movies, which have some incredible sound in them. He did, I don't know, a movie you may not have seen, George Lucas's first movie, THX 1138. Have you ever seen that?
I've heard of that. I don't think I've seen
it's great.
Right.
They retransferred it a few years ago and it looks really good. It's definitely worth checking out. He did the sound design for that. Alan Splett is an inspiration. He's known for, he did Eraserhead. He did a lot of, of David Lynch's movies, most of them before he died. Is a big inspiration. And, you know, I mean, trying to think, I mean, like who else I'm really inspired by these days. I mean, I think Denny Villeneux, who did Dune, obviously, most recently, he did Arrival. He did this remake of well, I mean, I don't know if you've seen Dune, but it just won the Academy Award. Incredible.
Yeah, I was thinking
sound,
it won several Academy Awards. Even just watching the clip,
movie.
I was just like, wow, man.
This sound,
everything about that movie looked extremely and sounded extremely impressive.
Yeah. I mean, I'm loving everything that he's doing. You know, I mean, I think that it's interesting. Like, I try to enjoy movie. Like I really make an effort to not get too obsessed with like as a movie watcher with like really dissecting and really like thinking about the sound. Cause I think the best movies, you never think about the sound. They call sound the invisible art because when it's working really well, you never think about it. And I actually I really try to make sound that's like that, where it's not like trying to show off or really be something obvious. It's something that's
like a good extra.
Working.
There's nothing worse than an extra that's like overacting in the background. You're like,
right,
dude,
exactly.
You're an extra. Please stop right now.
Right,
you're horrible.
Right, exactly. I mean, that when what we're doing is really working, it's invisible. It's just working at the subliminal level. So, you know, I think I was inspired by a lot of the things that every sound designer is inspired by, is, you know, all the great science fiction films, all the Star Wars films. But, you know, another movie that I love that is Gravity, is a great Touchstone movie. I think. Have you ever seen that?
Is that with George Clooney?
Yeah.
Am I wrong? In Sandra Bullock? Is that one?
Yeah. Incredible.
Well, it's an interesting film.
Movie.
Yeah. It's so contingent on sound because there's not a lot of that is just the anticipation, what's I'm looking at, right? Like you're building all this tension through all these other things.
Exactly.
There is no dialogue a lot of times.
Exactly. Right. Exactly. It's very immersive. You know, so that is a movie I think of immediately. That's like more recent movie that was really inspiring. I'm trying to think. I was just, I need, this is one of these questions that I get asked a lot, and I always be like, oh, you know what?
Well, you know what, man? It's
that,
like, I don't know if it's quite the same, but for me, if like someone asks me, who's your favorite guitar player? Who's your favorite band? I'm like, oh my God, dude, I can't answer that. Like,
exactly.
And then I hate, like, if I do like a print interview or something and it's like, what's your, and I can't help myself. I have to list like 40 different people.
Right, exactly.
Then as soon as you submit it, you're like, oh, but I forgot this guy.
You know what's another great movie? This is another Walter Murch movie, The Conversation. Have you ever seen The Conversation?
I don't think I have. What
if
is
you
that?
haven't seen it, you should check it out. It's basically a movie about it's about a character. It was directed by Coppola. It's an early Coppola movie before The Godfather. And it's about a character that's like a surveillance guy. And so the movie's all kind of about surveillance, and the main character, that's his job. And so the whole movie it's kind of a mystery that unfolds, but it unfolds as like a guy through an experience of a guy who's hired to like do surveillance. And he's like tracking a woman who's maybe having an affair and you're not sure, but it's this incredible, like, this just so beautifully crafted kind of like, there's this opening scene where they're like doing this really sophisticated surveillance where like somebody's got a microphone on the roof listening and a guy's in the van. And then there's another guy walking past trying to hear the conversation of this couple in a park. So you're getting little snippets of the sound and it's kind of fading in and out. And that's an incredible movie. And actually this movie I did for Amazon, The Voyeurs, we really tried to, in a way, kind of make a little bit of an homage to that movie through this movie, because it was also like a surveillance movie. So that's a like immediate touchstone movie for me that if you haven't seen, it's really worth checking out. It's also a great movie.
The Conversation. I definitely want to see that one.
Yeah.
What are some, like you mentioned, The Voyeur, what was the Patton Oswalt one again? That just
I Love My Dad.
I love my dad.
Yeah.
And I had a couple here, but all my stuff is dying.
We did the movie Searching. I did a really cool movie a couple years ago called United Skates. That's this documentary about African American roller skating culture. It's on HBO. If you want to check that out, it's a really cool, and that's a great movie. It's like documentary. We do quite a bit of documentary work. That movie, it's all roller skating, but because in the skating rinks they're always playing pop music, we couldn't use most of the recordings of the skating that were recorded during the shooting the documentary. So we actually had to go in and Foley all that skating through the whole movie. So all the skating you're hearing was all created in post-production.
Wow.
So, it's a great example of like total movie magic that happens that, and it's cool. It totally works. It feels like it's the real skating, but
yeah, you've got, your resume, man. Let's see. Am I right looks like about 150 different films
there's a bunch
you worked on?
Yeah.
What is, you've got an award nominee for, what is, FAMAS, FAMAS awards? What is that?
Oh, I don't know what that was. I don't know. Here's the thing. Like, I work in I do a lot of festival movies, and sometimes movies some of these movies go to like 100 festivals. And then sometimes you'll like get like it's 2 years later, you'll hear like, oh, I got an award for something, but it's like,
I see. Right. Because a lot of these are, a couple awards from various Film Quest. A couple of different, looks like some festival type stuff, but that's cool, man. This was really cool talking to you, Nathan. Thanks for doing this, man, because,
right on.
I think
super fascinating.
Yeah, dude. And like sound designer is not something I read a little bit, and I was just like immediately pretty fascinated because it's just such, like you said, it's like what did you say? The invisible,
the invisible art. Yeah, the invisible
art. And you're not consciously, of course we're hearing sounds, but
sure.
You're not thinking about all the little details you're hearing. Again, I'm coming back to the audio production thing. It's like all those little bells and whistles to me when I listen to stuff, especially with headphones or something, you just hear all these, what hits you immediately? The groove, the beat, right? The rhythm, the lyrics, right? The melody. But there's all this ear candy that's happening that's affecting you in ways you don't realize. It's kind of guiding you through the song, lifting you. And to me, it's like sound design seems to me in a cinematic way to be really kind of achieving the exact same thing. And I think that's fascinating, man. Vic, you started to say something about Dune, I think. Were you going to say something about that? Have you seen that?
Yeah, no. I was saying that was a great movie.
Yeah, it just won the Academy Award.
That was fantastic. Yeah,
it's really.
Did it won Best Sound Design? Did it? I don't think it won. It did win Best Sound Design.
Yeah,
it won several, I think. But Yeah,
most of the technical stuff. I think it won like visual effects.
Oh, it definitely did. Yeah,
definitely won visual effects. A couple others. Yeah, it's and music. I think Hans Zimmer got another Oscar for the music.
He did. You're right.
Yeah.
You're absolutely right about that. Yeah. Well, what else is Hans Zimmer? Do you know? What does he have? Gladiator, I think, maybe.
Oh man, he's done so many. All the Nolan movies, so many. Yeah, it's wild.
What's your favorite food? I don't know why I always like to ask this question.
Oh man, I love barbecue. A little barbecue pork ribs. It's pretty hard to beat.
Well, damn, dude, if you ever come to Texas, you gotta let us know. We'll
I try to come down there every year. I try to come down there every year for South by Southwest. I actually we were like about 10 years in a row we were down there, but we didn't make it this year because I was in the middle of getting ready for this next movie. But I think we're going to try to come down and watch the F1 race there coming up. And,
oh man, my fiance is so excited about that. She's a big F1 fan. I've gotten more into F1 because of her, and Coda's pretty cool, dude.
Yeah, it's a it looks like a good race. So yeah, and they just announced there's going to be Vegas, so next year.
Oh yeah, wow.
Yeah, like yesterday they announced there's going to be it's going to be on the Vegas Strip at night.
Oh wow,
F1 cars. Yeah, crazy.
Looks like I've got my next Vegas trip planned already.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh man, Sarah must know about this. I gotta enlighten her.
Yeah,
dude. Exciting. Well, best. Is there anything? Okay, plug your stuff, dude. Name your studio, your company again. Tell everybody.
Yeah, my company's called This Is Sound Design. The website's tisd.tv. Check it out. You can go onto the website. It talks about the studios. There's actually some articles up there. I've recently written some articles. I wrote an article for Post Magazine and wrote an article for Movie Maker Magazine, actually about some of the stuff we talked about tonight. So check that out. I just had this movie at South by Southwest that'll be coming out. I Love My Dad. That's going to be coming up. I'm getting ready to start another one. I'm trying to think what recently is out. Check out The Voyeurs on Amazon, which is a cool sexual thriller starring Sydney Sweeney. Really good. And really fun.
Yeah, I mean, it's sexual. No.
Yeah. It's like
there's something.
It's trying to bring back the erotic thriller. Erotic. I'm supposed to say erotic.
Oh, there you go. Erotic. Erotic novel. Erotic thriller.
Erotic thriller.
That's just the guy way of saying it. It's a sex movie or something.
Yeah. So that's a great. That's a good one to check out. Trying to think if we've got anything. Yeah, I think we're in a little bit of a lull. We had a lot of through. I mean, if you go to the website, you can see there's probably there's links to 20 movies there of recent stuff.
You got a lot. The website's awesome because you have kind of the current, more recent stuff right there on top. Like you said, there's articles, and I saw you had a lot of different articles online. And then, like you were saying earlier, man, it's really cool when you scroll down, you get that 3D look at the studio. That's killer, man. And it's so cool because you can see, you're actually yes, here's a big room. You kind of get the sense of the different rooms designed specifically for environment.
Yeah. So the website's great, and you can reach out on there if you want to make some sound for a movie. Come talk to us.
Or maybe Vic and I will be in touch for our podcast, so we don't have to edit ourselves anymore.
Oh yeah, there you go. Yeah, we do that. We edit podcasts for IMDb actually. So they have a couple of podcasts that we do. Yeah.
And before Vic got on, right? Because last thing is, wait, did you answer the food question?
Yeah,
he did.
Pork ribs.
Oh yeah, he said barbecue.
Brisket?
That's right. Yeah. That's got us on South by Southwest and all that. Okay.
Yeah.
Oh God, help Vic! Now I lost my train of thought. The hell was I about to say?
Were you going to talk about podcasts? Yeah.
Before you came on, you would talk about doing sound. Explain that again. That's fascinating. You're doing sound for podcasts.
During pandemic, we did several of these. We've been working with Dick Wolf, who does Law and Order, all the Law and Order in Chicago and all those shows. They did a podcast series. We've done a couple of them with it now. One's called Hunted, and the other one's called Dark Woods. And they're it's like a police procedural, on watching Law and Order, except that it's these are both kind of manhunt type. It's like cops on the hunt for drug dealers type thing, but it's all sound. So it's basically like the old school radio play, like you were talking about earlier, but
Yeah.
in the context of a podcast, but it's just a totally like fictional narrative, like, watching an episode of TV, except you're just listening. So yeah, it's cool. It's really
cool.
interesting. Foley's a big part of that. So, cause we don't have any picture. So actually we do for both those shows, they were both had a big outdoor component. Dark Woods is like all in the forest, like running around in the forest. So we did a lot of really cool Foley work where they would go out and actually do like long Foley takes of like a whole scene where characters are like walking and running through the woods. So the Foley artists would go out and just record like the whole scene, all because we don't have to synchronize it to picture. So they could just record the whole thing. So we're ultimately like building the whole experience out from nothing. So it's pretty cool. And it's pretty fun. I think we've actually gotten a lot of people have really excited about those podcasts because we work in movies, so we really bring that kind of like movie sound kind of depth and fullness to this podcast thing. So whereas like some of the other ones are good story wise, but I always feel like sound wise, it always feels a little bit like NPR. It's basically like, oh, it's just people talking. So we try to bring something really, really theatrical and cinematic to it. So yeah, it's worth checking out. Podcasting.
Awesome, man. Say the names of those one more time.
Dark Woods is one, and Hunted. Hunted starred Parker Posey, if you know that actress.
Oh yeah, sure. Parker Posey's a lot of the Christopher Guest stuff, I think.
Yeah. And then the most recent one, Dark Woods, is Corey Stoll. I don't know if you know Corey Stoll. He's been in a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
I know that name.
I just saw him. He was in. He was the cop in West Side Story. I just saw him. But he played. Did you watch the Sopranos movie that came out a little while back?
Yeah,
he played Junior Soprano.
Junior.
Yeah,
Uncle Junior Soprano.
Yeah, when we were recording Darkwoods, he said he was like, "Oh yeah, I'm working on a Sopranos thing." I was like, "Oh, that's interesting." But I was like, "Oh, you're Junior Soprano."
He was great in that movie.
So cool. Yeah.
He captured like all the mannerisms and the voice inflection.
Oh yeah. He's great.
He was great.
Yeah. He's in that. And some other cool actors too. So yeah, it's pretty cool. It's like I'm kind of curious to see where that goes. I don't think it's as big as talking podcasts, but I do think there is a kind of growing audience for that. For this kind of like fictional podcast, radio play type.
Yeah,
space,
that's kind of cool, man. Coming back, it's interesting how things work circular like that. Talking about the early radio, and here we are, in this podcast world with that coming back to that storytelling and that.
Yeah, it's fascinating.
Well, cool, dude.
Guys.
There was one other movie that I was reading, actually, the initial email I got, and you, of course, mentioned I Love My Dad, but then Crows Are White. Was that a new one? A documentary that was
another, that was
stuff?
another one. Oh, yeah, I should have mentioned that. That was another one we just had at South by Southwest.
Right, okay.
Really interesting. Sort of like a journey of it's sort of a documentary where the director is kind of a big subject of the movie. And it's kind of about his experience. It initially starts that he's kind of going to learn about these like really hardcore Buddhist monks who do these like wild, almost like feats of strength type things where they'll like stay awake for 60 days or like the big thing they do is that like someone will walk for 7 years, like the equivalent of the entire circumference of the earth. And if they miss one day, then they have to kill themselves. It's like really over the top stuff.
Holy shit. I want to see this, actually.
Yeah, it's great. And but then through the course, then what you find out through the movie is that actually he kind of grew up in Ireland, but through a Muslim family, and that he's kind of grappling with his kind of experience in life as both a Muslim and he's married to a non-Muslim woman. And then in the monastery, he meets this monk who's sort of the black sheep of the monastery who like has an iPad and like loves speed metal and is like and just doesn't do any of the stuff he's supposed to do. And so they become like close friends and they like go to a Slayer concert together. And so it's really kind of about like an exploration of like faith and also like faith meeting real life and trying to square those things. It's a really interesting, cool movie. Yeah,
that's good. Like you and me, Vic. It's like Vic's like, I'm gonna like do jujitsu tournament. I'm testing for a belt, and I'm doing a strongman, or not a strong, and I'm flying to Hawaii to do a. What are you doing? This is amazing, dude. Like the
Spartan race.
Spartan race.
Oh, whoa!
And I'm
wild.
the guy that's like, let's go to a Clutch concert and get some pizza.
right. Exactly. Yeah, it's a cool movie. It's definitely worth checking out. It has some beautiful music too. So, and it'll be
awesome,
around.
man. We're definitely gonna
be around.
Yeah. Definitely going to check out this stuff, and looking forward to plugging it, man. Like, this has just really been fascinating talking to you, Nathan. Thank you so much for making time.
Yeah, right on. And next
absolutely.
time I'm in Austin, I'll reach out. I'll let you know.
Dude, I'd love to come by when I'm in LA sometime, too, if you're not busy.
Yeah, anytime.
I know I'll be
anytime.
there for a short stint in June, so I might hit you up. But
definitely come by. Check out the studios. Yeah,
I would love to,
have
man.
you.
I'd love to. My old stomping ground, sort of.
We'll have some popcorn.
Oh, dude, I'm there. Oh, you messed up now. He's like, I should have said that. I fly in tomorrow. Nathan Ruyle, everybody. Dude, thanks so much. It's been a blast.
Thanks a lot.
Until next
Appreciate
time, hang out for just a sec, Nathan. This is Skunk Manhattan and Victor Ramos, and we'll see you next time.
Hey, folks, that concludes another episode of the podcast. Guest links will be available in the show notes. We'd like to thank our friends at Top Shelf Music for showcasing the podcast on their site. Be sure and check them out at topshelfmusicmag.com for the latest music news, reviews, and events. We'd also like to thank the folks over at Tragan Guitars, Godin Guitars, Ernie Ball Strings, and 5 Iron Woodworks. Have a great week, and catch you on the next one.